There we go. Thanks for starting the recording. I would have forgotten. So you heard from Lindsay a little bit about NPCN. This talk is about the Wild Buffalo Summit, but it doesn't exist in isolation. It is about our grassland conservation work. So first I'll give a bit of a context about Canadian grassland conservation for those who don't know it or need a refamiliarization. Just get that there. Yes. So you heard about GPCN morphing out of the Northern Plains network, and it's a collaborative for, as we heard, restoring and protecting grasslands from Canada to Mexico. The big ones is our focus. And there are 4 working groups: bison, birds, mapping, and prairie dog. A significant part of our work on plains buffalo continues to be with Indigenous peoples. So grassland protection and restoration, as well as reconciliation, drive our passion for plains buffalo rematriation. We need to protect grasslands. They've been considered critical or endangered. And if we don't protect them, we won't have a place to allow plains buffalo to be buffalo again. We have a duty to reconcile with Indigenous peoples. Plains buffalo are or have been an important part of Plains Indigenous peoples' cultural identity, their food sovereignty, and ecosystem functioning. What we're seeing now is the culmination of a lot of work. We just didn't get here overnight. There is momentum, and it really started in my mind back in 1989 when World Wildlife Fund had a program called Prairie for Tomorrow in Canada, and that led to the establishment of Alberta's Prairie Conservation Forum and Saskatchewan's Prairie Conservation Action Plan. Then we went through a series of conservation mapping and planning exercises by both the Alberta and Saskatchewan governments, the Nature Conservancy of Canada, World Wildlife Fund in Canada and in the USA, as well as the Commission for Environmental Cooperation. In 2004, plains bison were finally listed as a threatened species by the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada, but they have still not been legislated with protections under Canada's Species at Risk Act. That prevents some of the work that we want to do on recovery and allowing buffalo to be buffalo. About the same time as the COSEWIC status, the NPCN, with a heavy lift by WWF USA, produced Ocean of Grass. The intent was to focus attention on those large landscapes in the Northern Plains with high biodiversity and exceptional restoration potential, places where we might have bison, prairie dogs, sage grouse, and black-footed ferrets, amongst the many other gorgeous species on the plains. After the formation of NPCN, several other networks also formed, first on the Northern Plains, the Transboundary Grassland Partnership between Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Montana. Then eventually the NPCN morphed into GPCN, working those large landscapes from Canada to Mexico. And most recently, the Central Grasslands Roadmap was formed to deal with a wide range of biodiversity conservation on small and large landscapes from Canada to Mexico. Only GPCN has a bison working group. In 2021, grasslands were identified by Environment and Climate Change Canada as a priority landscape for recovering species at risk. In 2023, the Canada-Mexico-US Trilateral Committee for Wildlife and Ecosystem Conservation and Management endorsed a continental approach for grassland conservation. Grasslands and buffalo continue to be intertwined in our work. Then came the Buffalo Summits in Canada last winter and the North American one in Colorado in the spring. The next ones for both of these are being worked on. The one I'm working on for Canada is in Saskatoon on May 13th and 14th of this year. Many positive things are now happening with buffalo. The Buffalo Treaty is foremost in my mind with respect to that. The Buffalo Treaty says buffalo has been our relative Buffalo is part of us, and we are part of buffalo, culturally, materially, and spiritually. Our ongoing relationship is so close and so embodied on us that buffalo is the essence of our holistic ecocultural lifeways. In Canada, at least 34 Indigenous peoples with territories in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba have signed on to this treaty, as have more than 100 across North America as a whole. In doing so, they have agreed to pursue the following shared objective. It is our collective intention to recognize buffalo as a wild, free-ranging animal and as an important part of the ecological system. So as the grassland networks have expanded continentally and globally, first with the Central Grasslands Roadmap Summit, here it looks like the planets are indeed coming into alignment for grasslands and perhaps buffalo. Then came WWF International's Global Grassland and Savannas Dialogue Platform, which continues, and it's all part of the momentum that was building towards IYRP in 2026. In between, we had the 30 by 30 approach, which is emphasizing the need for 30% of the world's lands and waters to be in some form of protection. Canada has committed to protecting 30% of its lands and waters by 2030, an ambitious statement, I think, and we told the previous environment minister, but he was keen to get going on it. So we got a lot of work to do to get anywhere close to that. So here we are in 2026 in what many of us in Canada are calling IYRP, the United Nations designated International Year of Grasslands and Grasslands People, as we talk about it in Canada and other parts of the world. And even in parts of Canada, they're calling it the International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralists, which doesn't seem to fit our Indigenous ways particularly. It is re-emphasizing, though, on the global stage, the importance of grasslands and cultural ways. The Central Grasslands Roadmap has recently helped us update our broad mapping all the way from Canada to Mexico. And we can see on this map areas of yellow and green that might form the bulk of the lands where we have the best chance of protecting the greatest variety of short and mixed grass habitats and species. It doesn't mean to say we don't have work to do further east on the tall grass prairies and that, but if we're going to be looking at restoring or rematriating buffalo on the land, these green and yellow areas are where we probably are getting started and need to do more work. So how did the Wild Buffalo Summit get started? Oh, there it goes. It just seems to delay in getting changed there. In the late 1980s, the AWA had a field trip, AWA being Alberta Wilderness Association, out to Canadian Forces Base Suffield and noticed wildlife issues not being addressed by the base and its Environmental Advisory Committee. CFB Suffield is a mostly native grassland area of about 1,000 square miles. Along the way, we helped to get a national wildlife area established on the east side of the base. And in 2024, when we were reconnecting with the base, we found out that the biggest user of the base, the British Army, was going to pull out, which raised concerns about the whole future of the base and protection of its native grasslands. We saw this as the greatest potential conservation and reconciliation opportunity in the plains of Canada in our 50 years of work in grasslands. It could further Buffalo Treaty work. There's been a long history of use of the Suffield area by the Niitsitapi or Blackfoot people, and there are over 1,675 known cultural sites there. It was our intent to help reconnect Indigenous peoples to their territories. The Army pullout fizzled to a 50% reduction, but we continued discussions. We met with the base commander of the day, and he started a round of talks on species at risk and land access for Indigenous peoples. He brought up the subject of plains buffalo and we continue to pursue that possibility for the species on the National Wildlife Area, even though the British Army is now coming back in a more fulsome way to the rest of the base with this whole changing world order. The area is large enough to consider plains buffalo rematriation. Through the Central Grasslands Roadmap Working Group, we learned that the Environment and Climate Change Canada Department was considering listing under the Species at Risk Act plains bison as a threatened species. They would need spaces for recovery. With the Suffield National Wildlife Area fresh in our minds, in 2024, we proposed to the Roadmap Work Group a Canadian Wild Buffalo Summit to kickstart that work, which would eventually need public consultation and deep consultation with Indigenous peoples. So we brought together a great group of people from across the Canadian Great Plains and produced a report which is guiding our work and the next summit. It's chaired by two wonderful Indigenous women, Tasha Hubbard at the University of Alberta and Candace Peak Cardoso at the University of Saskatchewan. We had Indigenous peoples from 3 prairie provinces who either have buffalo or are in the process of rematriating plains buffalo, including leadership, elders, and land techs. This included the coordinator of the Indigenous Kinship Circle of the Central Grasslands Roadmap. We also had commercial bison associations from Alberta and Canada. Environmental groups included the Alberta Wilderness Association, the Nature Conservancy of Canada from all 3 prairie provinces, and Environment and Climate Change Canada as an observer. There was additional interest from ranchers, provincial governments, and other environmental groups, but we were limited in space, so gathered information in other ways from them. And here's the list of who was able to come and generously shared their perspectives and expertise. So a real who's who of people out there working on buffalo on all of our behalves and on behalf of the ecosystem. So we discussed a wide-ranging number of issues. This was based on a series of summary briefs that we prepared prior to the summit. It included the history of plains buffalo loss, the intentional extermination, if you wish, of buffalo to really put Indigenous people in a tough spot so that settlement could begin. But we also heard about the importance of plains buffalo for cultural revitalization and how it's happening now. There's a powerful connection of plains buffalo to Indigenous peoples, and that was clearly obvious. It was surprising that some people actually didn't know the story of buffalo and the connection there of the extermination with Indigenous peoples' lives. We discussed that shared experience of rematriation and including the recent transfer of Yellowstone buffalo from Fort Peck, Montana to the Mosquito First Nation in Saskatchewan. And Shami is on here who helped with that. Thank you, Shami. We covered the issues of wild versus domestic, including the notion that wild is a spectrum. It's not just one thing, and it will mean different things to different people, as well as bison genetics. On that notion of wild, we just see it being allowing buffalo to be buffalo and with less management, less fences, and more ability to roam. We noted that rematriation was happening across the Great Plains from Canada to Mexico, but there were different management approaches as well as big challenges. We need all the help we can get. We examined existing policy and legislation, provincially and federally, with respect to how plains buffalo are considered both as livestock and as wild species. We still don't have wild designations in all of the places that we need it, even though the chiefs in Alberta explicitly asked the government of Alberta about 10 years ago to do that. We explored the removal of obstacles to success using legal exceptions in legislation to make sure we have the flexibility to avoid unintended consequences. We re-emphasize the importance of partnerships, and environmental groups have more recently been partnering with Indigenous peoples more to provide support to help them achieve their dreams rather than what it has been in the past, which is to, I guess, in many ways, we impose things on people. The need for legal designation of plains buffalo federally and provincially was highlighted, although no agreement on how that might look was achieved. That'll be dealt with in Summit 2. We agreed that this was a big tent process, and again, we thought it was the only way to move forward on this, to respect all economic interests, but the expressly get out there that we need to find room for wild plains buffalo. We also had transparent and honest discussions with agricultural, ranching, and commercial bison interests. Three main areas for action emerged. The first being the options for policy and legislation, and that includes listing plains buffalo as a threatened species federally, and then listing as a wild species provincially. That work is being led by the University of Saskatchewan College of Law, and for the second summit, there will be input from the Environmental Law Centre in Alberta. This needs further work given some of the concerns from Indigenous peoples. But as I mentioned, the chiefs in Alberta called for that wild listing. So we're still on that track. It's just, again, trying to prevent unintended consequences. The second theme was a large landscape-based rematriation of plains buffalo. And we're talking about southwestern Alberta, Waterton north up towards the Whaleback area and over onto the Ghana lands, the Blood Tribe and Piikani, and perhaps further north. The Suffield and Wainwright military reserves. Wainwright actually was the site of the Buffalo National Park and caused a lot of the issues with disease transfer between cattle and buffalo. The problem has never been disease being transferred from buffalo to cattle. It's always been the other way around in my mind. We're also looking at big public land base in southeastern Alberta and southwestern Saskatchewan, where there's some of the most extensive remaining northern glaciated plains grasslands in the world. And then again in southwestern Manitoba, and we're just learning more about that area. This is the conservation group's area of focus, but many Indigenous people also see this as essential. I'm actually at a Buffalo Producers Meeting in Alberta. It's Indigenous Peoples Day, and that message was made loud and clear. Even though we may have an agricultural or a production focus for buffalo in some Indigenous people, they still want to see the animals treated right, and they want to see that large landscape-based rematriation happen. The third theme was technical assistance in buffalo for rematriation. Help has already been offered, and it's been available from Elk Island National Park, the Defenders of Wildlife, as we heard on the mosquito issue earlier, the Nature Conservancy in the US, Nature Conservancy Canada, and the International Buffalo Relations Institute. Also, the bison associations just want to see more buffalo out there, and so they've offered their help. And the government of Saskatchewan has an agricultural-based bison program. And Canada's also getting into the act, and I'll get into that later. This notes some of those areas I was talking about where rematriation is happening or being considered, the large extensive native grasslands showing up in that gold color. And this area is really the northern glaciated plains of Montana and into Saskatchewan and Alberta. It doesn't cover the area in southeastern Saskatchewan and southwestern Manitoba where rematriation is also happening. As I said, we're still learning about that. I learned a bit more today, and actually some really cool stuff is happening there. So the emerging themes, because we're having discussions with people prior to the second summit, and so some of the same themes are emerging, but key amongst those is the importance of relationships. and that's governments, environmental groups, Indigenous peoples, private landowners interested in conservation. We need a nuanced and tailored approach to individuals we're working with, to regions we're in. Every place is different, and you've got to learn it and go with it. We are solution seeking, and we regard our work as voluntary, not forcing anyone to do anything. We want durable solutions, not some ephemeral quick wins. This starts to put in graphic form, and we continue to add kind of some of those relationships, but at the center of all is the main thing. And the main thing is Plains buffalo. And we keep being reminded that the main thing is Plains buffalo in the context of grassland conservation and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. So other themes emerging are to just get buffalo out on the land. And we call this kind of the buffalo keepers and guardians piece. It's not necessarily economic dollar kind of things. We're talking more cultural revitalization. Plains buffalo were the original keystone wildlife, and they need a place to be wild, just a place to be buffalo. We accommodate all other native wildlife and don't want fences that we might be using for uh, buffalo keeping or guarding or economic activities to add new barriers to wildlife movement. Of course, we want to keep people and buffalo safe, so we're exploring various approaches, both to wildlife-friendly fencing, but also to new technology that could assist with that and the connectivity that we need in going forward. The thought is we should build support by stepping up the pace and rematriating Plains buffalo and showing success by doing it well, even if it is on smaller land bases. This may involve more keeping and less buffalo being buffalo. As I mentioned, the federal government is getting into the act. Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada just announced an Indigenous prairie bison initiative, and they're talking this afternoon at the gathering I'm at. This is a 3-year, $5 million program, and that could be a big part of that keeper or guardian approach. The National Circle for Indigenous Agriculture and Food is involved with that program, and they are trying to make it less agriculture focused. We heard a lot about that this morning, and the huge reverence and importance of buffalo as a cultural species, not as a money generator. Doesn't mean to say there aren't ways to do that, and provide funding to help them keep their buffalo, but the focus certainly is on respecting the buffalo, looking after the buffalo, and looking after the habitats that they live on so that we don't get wrecks, because I think some people have gotten into it too fast in the past without the required expertise, and that's led to some concerns being expressed by people who are looking in on these things. And lastly, I think it's lastly, is removing barriers to wild buffalo. As I said earlier, it's a broad term on a spectrum, and more about buffalo allowed to just be buffalo with less keeping and management and reduced barriers to movement. This is also focused on keeping large grassland areas protected, or at least right side up, where buffalo could be more wild. We need federal and provincial wild species at risk legal designations that address barriers to opportunities. This opens doors to discussions and resources. And I think very quickly we could probably remove the species at risk designation if we had these large areas to repopulate, rematriate buffalo on. We need financial and technical innovations to help with discussions with rights holders. We've heard about one buffalo producer in Alberta, a Métis, that is actually looking at using some of the virtual fencing technology that is being used on cattle. He is in an operation that runs both cattle and bison, not together, although very close to there. The Piikani are running bison and wildlife in the same pastures with no disease transmission, no ill effects. We know it's done in other areas as well. And it's going to be part of our path forward to sharing that information with people who think it can't be done. We learned that there may be legal barriers to having bison on public land in the prairies, perhaps in Saskatchewan, and we want to make sure that this iconic keystone species can live there. Public lands have a multi-use mandate, with wildlife being an important aspect. There can be no more important wildlife to have in these grasslands than plains buffalo. As I said previously, this is not about forcing our way in, but we do need to work with and prepare communities for the rematriation of plains buffalo if we're going to have long-term success. And out of the summit, too, we'll have more detailed action plans in all those topic areas that I just discussed. On the policy and legislation, the area-based work, trying to find the low-hanging fruit where it will be easier to start that process, and also a process for the buffalo keepers and guardians, which may not be a focus of the second summit, but certainly our action plans. And they are talking about workshops and extension for tech transfer and sourcing animals and best management practices, and a separate whole gathering for buffalo keepers. And here there's potential for a intertribal buffalo council like entity in Canada to handle this. So ITBC is US based, and it handles a lot of work and lobbying on behalf of Indigenous peoples. And there are groups both in the US and Canada that are exploring that model to bring to Canada. So we are the Wild Buffalo Summit. Our Blackfoot name, Ini Komutan. We struggle against the strong current for buffalo. Thanks for listening. If there are any questions, I can try and answer them. This is a long journey. Indigenous peoples have been waiting 150 years. I hope it's not another 150 years before we see some of these big visions come to pass. Thanks for listening.
That was wonderful. Yeah, thank you, Cliff. If you have questions, feel free to either raise a hand or drop it in the chat. Okay, Rick?
It's more like a comment. It's interesting how there are different approaches toward the same goal in different countries, and it's useful to learn the experiences in other places to see what can be applied in a third place. Thank you very much, Cliff.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, it's important that we kind of use all of them if we're going to be successful, right? And then apply that knowledge to all the different relationships we have.
Rob Gardner?
Hi, Cliff. Thanks a lot for that good summary of the history of bison conservation there. The American Prairie Foundation, now just American Prairie, in Montana, has taken a different approach, and they've made use of buffalo's designation as livestock to secure grazing leases at a fairly low cost. And that's the sort of free enterprise approach that the ranchers seem to be able to understand, even if they didn't really support it. It was kind of hard to argue against buying somebody's grazing lease and then putting something else on. But I'm just wondering if that's something that you can see happening around here.
Yes and no. uh, I, I think, again, in specific areas, I would say yes, and in other areas, not. The problem is it's almost like Plains buffalo needs a special designation. It's so important and so complicated. If we call it wild and call it threatened, then it creates unintended consequences for commercial bison producers. Uh, if we don't call it wild, uh, then they're just stray livestock venturing out and can be shot on site. Or, if they get hit by a vehicle or something, maybe there's an insurance liability to whoever owns that livestock. So, we have to think through all of these things. My hope is that all of these things will be applied in different ways in different places, uh, in ways that are appropriate for that local situation. And I think that's the key. If we don't get the locals on side, we're not going to have a durable solution and something that will be there centuries from now, not just decades from now.
Bridget's got a question in the chat. It's a daunting task, so breaking it down to individuals, how can we help support, share, and promote the understanding of the cause?
I think, yeah, just talking to people about it and how excited you might be about it. I mean, there's a lot of excitement out there about this. I heard that in the room today, and we have producers and cultural icons of buffalo conservation in the same room together, trying to find the path forward together. So if we don't have these conversations, then people don't know how important it is. To get that done, to get that work done. So, we urge people to write to their politicians, to soften them up a bit about this. This whole new initiative was just meeting with legislators in Canada and trying to map out some policy framework going forward to deal with bison on the prairies. So the work is happening, but if the politicians aren't hearing from their constituents, it gets shoved to a lower, not so important thing to think about, right? So the more people that speak up, and that's what we'll be seeking from the summit, I think, is what are some of those actions that don't inflame things, but actually move the process along as it's intended to do.
Any other questions for Cliff? All right. Did you want to have any final words about sort of your hopes for the upcoming summit and sort of near term, I guess, near term goals?
Near-term goals are, yeah, I think it's just preparing people for what I see as an eventuality, which is more plains buffalo on the landscape in all the many wonderful ways that can happen. And so I'm just excited. So I hope other people get excited about this. I'm excited to hear about Rurik's and Myrna's work down in Mexico and the work of American Prairie, the Southern Plains Land Trust, and all the tribes in the US and many First Nations now in Canada that are on board and doing things. It's the momentum is something like I have never seen before. I was told back in the 1970s this stuff wasn't ever going to happen. I think we can break the log jam this time.
I think Rob has one more question, or is that just
No, Cliff, I think that there's a really positive message here that doesn't always come through. Uh, in my time in rural southeastern Alberta, I've seen a pretty extensive depopulation. I think that bison have supported far more people in the distant past and can again support more people on the landscape through a range of local processing of the meat, hides, and other products, but also ecotourism, indigenous tourism. I mean, the Medicine Hat News today had a substantial article on indigenous tourism and how fast it's increasing. Medicine Hat is not noted for its indigenous tourism business, but it could be in a few years. So I think the opportunities for economic expansion and diversification and revitalization, as well as giving a social option for people other than a big city for their future lives.
Yeah, good point. And certainly that was part of the discussion this morning.
Bridget?
Thank you. So it's phenomenal that there's a budget that's been awarded for a 3-year initiative. Um, how is the breakdown of using that budget aligning with the project itself? Just to
Uh,
have a general idea.
Yeah, we don't know all the details. That's why I'm here, just learning. They're just rolling it out. But the focus seems to be on getting out into Indigenous communities and transferring knowledge and facilitating the transfer of buffalo. But they want to do it right. So it's not just about dumping a bunch of buffalo into an area. It's making sure there's good management, there's good range health for the animals to be in, good water and those sort of things, and people willing to take it on because it has happened in the past where some First Nations have uh, sold off their buffalo because it was too big a burden to do. So, they're trying to find that path forward where, we get some federal dollars going into this and then looking at kind of what's the economics piece of it as well. So it's both more buffalo out there, but because they see enormous economic potential from uh, economic development point of view on various indigenous lands. So, and again, with that not traditional agriculture focus, but with a very high respect for the animal and the cultural life ways.
Thank you. I would love to keep up um, on the advancement of that. That's fascinating, super interesting to me.
Well, thanks for listening in. And yes, Alberta Wilderness Association, certainly one area to get some of that information from, the work that Nature Conservancy of Canada is doing. And you will probably see some things obviously posted on the Prairie Bison Initiative website that Canada has just put up as well. And I will be hearing about right after lunch.
Great. Well, yeah, thank you again, Cliff, for sharing that. And we'll look forward to hopefully hearing from Tasha, possibly in May after the summit with an update about how things are going. So yeah, stay tuned to our website and we'll hopefully have that. Thank you everybody for joining us today. And yeah, I'll send out to everybody when we put the reporting up on the website a link so you can share it to anybody who may have missed out. I hope you all have a lovely day.
Thanks, everyone. Stay well.